Hey, it's Jag. Where did that day go? You're procrastinating again, aren't you?
Yeah.
Well, once again, I've been out in the wood shop for about 6 hours, and I haven't really done what I intended to do. So it's always really interesting to me, no matter how organized you are, no matter how much you think you've straightened and cleaned up, things always come up last minute that you need to do. So first of all, I built myself an air cleaner about a week and a half ago, but it wasn't far enough back in the shop. That was the first thing that took up some time, and I had tools and things lying around all over. I got to the end of the day last time and just left it all, and I kind of forgot about that. So I also had to do a lot of sweeping and putting tools away. I still have a side panel that I have to put on there. I had to glue up a panel. I'm waiting for the glue on that to cure, and then I'll put that up. But this is working pretty well even the way it is without these side seals. It's turned off right now. I'll turn it to the low setting. It has 3 settings. I really only use low and high. I never use middle. So here's the low setting that I usually have it on when I'm just kind of tinkering out here and not really doing any sanding or cutting or anything that's generating dust. So here's that level. So that's not too bad at all. I probably could even leave it on when I'm filming videos. I'll find out, I guess, when I see this footage. And then when I turn on the dust collector and I start using the table saw or the router or my sand or anything that generates dust, I turn it up to high. So here's how that sounds. That's not too bad either. I'm right over beside it too. I'll go back around to where I usually am with that turned up high. This is the level that it's at. Even when I'm shooting, if I forget that it's on or something, I think you'll be able to hear what I'm saying. What I intended to do today, and I'm not going to get to all of it, the big part of it was going to be getting the tops glued on to the blanks. Before I can glue up those tops, I need 2 things. I need to make some clamping cauls. I don't have any long reach clamps, and because that wood isn't perfectly flat for the tops, I want to make some clamping cauls to make sure that the middle gets clamped down solidly, not just the outsides. The regular wood clamps only reach in 3 inches, maybe 4 inches. I wanted to make sure I could get right into the middle of that. The other thing I suppose I could get by without right now, but I have needed for a long time, and I know I will need for other parts of this build, is a crosscut sled. I figure today's a good day to do that. At least I'll get those 2 things done. So we'll start with the clamping cauls. Here on the table saw is one of the body blanks, and here is the thinner of the tops. You can see that gluing it down, the clamps are really only going to reach to the outside. I know that this top is narrower than my blank. I probably will cut down these blanks before I glue the top on as well, or maybe after. We'll see what happens there. But this is still plenty wide enough for the guitar I'm building. A lot of people will just take a piece of 2x4 and they'll put it across and they'll clamp that down, and that's okay. That works fine. I want to make some real clamping cauls. So if you're not familiar with that, real clamping cauls are not straight on the end that goes toward what they're clamping down. There's a bit of a hump in the middle, very, very slight, but just enough so that when you clamp it, the pressure is concentrated in the middle of that caul, and that clamps down the middle of your workpiece. So I'm going to make cauls out of this piece of 2x4. It's just wide enough for the job. And what I'm going to do is run it on the table saw, cut it in half. Then I'm going to cut the other edge, the rough edge. But what I will do before I do that is I'll put a little shim at one end. This is short enough that when it goes through my blade, it will be against my fence all the way. So I can put just a little shim on this end. I'll just tape that on, maybe a piece of veneer or something, just to sort of tilt it out a little bit. And then when I cut, it will cut straight on this side, but it will be at an angle in relation to the other side. Then I will flip that, put the shim at this end, and then I'll run it through that way. So what I'll end up having is I'll have a cut that goes this way and a cut that goes this way. And I will set it up so that there's a bit of a flat in the middle, maybe about an inch of flat in the middle. Okay, well that's the clamping Cauls made. It's just a very gentle hump in there. It's not going to crush the wood, but it should hold things in pretty well in the middle of the blanks when I glue things up. So I've got that done now. For those of you who don't know what a crosscut sled is, I'll give you just a quick explanation. There are plenty of videos on YouTube. A crosscut sled is a more accurate way to make 90-degree crosscuts. You can do that with your miter gauge on your table saw. You have this little 7 or 8 inch backing that you might be putting a 3-foot board on, and then you're trying to wrangle it through the blade and trying to get a 90-degree cut, and it doesn't work out that well. There's such a small space for it to register on here. I have done the trick where you take a solid piece of very straight wood, a couple of feet long, and bolt it on there and use that, and that works great in a pinch, but it's not as accurate as maybe you would want. The other thing with your miter sled is you can hear there's a little bit of play in it. There's always a little bit of play in your miter gauge. As I'm doing this, I can see it's shimmying back and forth, maybe a 64th of an inch, probably less than that. But it's enough that you're not going to get an accurate 90-degree cut. So how a crosscut sled works is you use a piece of plywood. I have a piece down here. You can use scrap plywood, it's fine. Usually 1/2 inch is what people use. I've got 3/4 here because that's just what I have. You put a couple of runners on it, spaced so that they fit in the miter slots on your table saw, and then those run through the miter slots. They're attached to your crosscut sled, and the sled goes through very solidly. It doesn't have any play or wiggle, so it always makes the exact same cut. You can use anything you want to make runners. These are plastic, a high density plastic, very low friction, and I like them because they don't move with climate changes. Here in Canada, we go from very, very dry, very, very cold in the winter to quite humid and warm in the summer and everything in between. And if I were using wood runners on here, I might have problems with that. Although I have used oak and other wood. Basically, when you do that, you want to set it up so that the grain is going horizontal, not vertical. Wood swells across the grain. So if you make your runners and the grain is going vertical, as your climate changes, those things are going to widen and shrink more this way than they will this way, and that will cause them to bind in your miter slot, or if you cut them and it's really humid and they've already swelled, when it gets dry they'll shrink and you might get some play. So I'm using this low friction plastic. It works really well. It just fits right in your miter slots and slides with very little resistance and virtually no play. This piece of wood I have here is 28 inches by about 27 inches. I'm going to leave it 28 inches wide, or pretty close to that. The width is what we want. We want some really good width to support the piece as we're cutting. As far as the depth, I'm going to go 24 inches today. I can always cut it down if I find 24 is too much. Now the other thing about a crosscut sled is you reinforce it at the front and the back with 2 pieces of very flat wood. It's not so important at the front edge, just something to hold the crosscut sled together, because what we're going to do is once we get the crosscut sled made, we're going to cut a kerf through this plywood, and we need something to hold that in place. So basically you could even just use a piece of 2x4 at that end. At the end closest to you though, this is what your piece is going to register against. So you want a piece of very straight, very flat, very solid wood that isn't going to move a lot. A lot of people will make them out of MDF, or will laminate some plywood together to get a block, because plywood's very stable and so is MDF. This is a big chunk of oak that I've had for quite a few years, probably 6 or 7 years, and it hasn't moved at all, and it's perfectly flat. So I'm going to use this piece of oak. What we're going to do is size the sled, then we will attach the back fence, then we will do a temporary attachment of this fence, the actual right angle fence, and then we'll make our kerf. And then I will go back and adjust this fence so that it's at a perfect 90-degree angle to the kerf we cut. Before we do any of that, we will put the runners in the miter slots. We'll raise them up with some washers so they're just above the top of the table, and then we need to screw those into the bottom of the sled itself. I'm going to screw them in from the top. If you were using wood runners, you could do the same thing, screw them in from the top, and then when you take it off, take the screws out, put some glue on and re-tighten all the screws in just to make that a little more solid. You can't, as far as I know, you can't glue this stuff. It's low friction and glue doesn't really stick to it. So I'm just going to be relying on some short screws. We want to be long enough to go through the plywood and into the plastic, but we don't want to go through and end up wreaking havoc on our miter slots. On the top of the sled, what we'll do with those holes is we'll countersink so that the screw heads aren't sticking up. Of course, it should be obvious why that would be a problem. I'm going to start by sizing this piece of plywood. I'm going to take it down to 24 long, so then when I put these two pieces on, they're about 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches deep each. So my actual capacity in the sled will be about 20 to 21 inches in the sled. So I think that's plenty. Okay, so I cut this to, it's 27 wide. I just wanted to have the edges be a little more crisp than they were. That's a recycled piece of plywood. I checked it out and I thought 24 inches just seemed a little too long to me. It felt like it wanted to, I would spend more time trying to stabilize it than actually paying attention to my cut, which is not a good idea. So I've cut it down to 21 inches deep total. Once I get the two fences on, it'll give me about 18 inches of capacity. I also went over and measured my body template. It's a little over 12 inches, and the blanks themselves are about 16 inches. So I figure with 18 inches, that's plenty enough capacity for any cross-cutting I would need to do. So what we need to do now is get these runners attached. I have some number 8 3/4 inch screws. I think these will be good. I have some shorter ones as well if these are too long. Probably 6 washers in there total. And then when I put the runner in there, it's sitting just a little bit above the top of the table. So the tendency can be to make that kerf go right in the middle of the crosscut sled. I don't think that's the best idea because it doesn't leave you as much support on the workpiece as you could need. So I am going to do my crosscut sled so that the edge of the sled will go along the edge of the left wing of my table saw. So that'll leave me about maybe 6 or 7 inches on the offcut side, and that's okay. Your offcut can hang off of your crosscut sled and just do what it does. So this will give me a good 20-21 inches of support for the workpiece. You can see I have the plywood for the sled lined up to the fence. It's not really so important that this plywood be perfectly square. What's going to be important is that the fence we put on this when we, after we make the kerf, is perfectly square to the cut. I'm just picky about those things, and there's no reason not to have it lined up square to the fence. My runners stick out now about 3 inches beyond the edge of the sled. That's fine. I can cut them off. It doesn't really matter. I can cut them flush with that edge of the sled, but the thing is, with them sticking out like that, I can see them when I'm trying to put the sled on the table saw, so it's just an easy visual guide. I have this all set to go. Okay, so that's the runners on the crosscut sled. It's going across really nicely on the table saw. Next thing we need to do is put that back fence on. If you recall, it's not so important that that one be square to the blade. It's just there basically to hold the far ends of the sled together. You won't be registering anything against it. So it's just there as a structural piece. So that's going to go at the back of the sled. When you're putting this on, we're going to screw it in with screws from the bottom, and you need to make sure you know where the path of the blade is, because you don't want to screw in the path of your table saw blade. So I'm just going to mark that on that end and this end so that I know when I'm putting the fences on where the blade will pass through. Okay, just rechecking that the back fence is flat on the bottom and flat and straight on the edge that the wood's going to register against, and it hasn't moved at all. The way that we put this fence on, we don't glue it on permanently. If we ever need to replace this fence, we can. The next thing we have to do is run a kerf into the sled, and then we can line up our fence after that. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one screw in at one end of this back fence just to save me some time once I get this kerf cut. And then that screw, this fence will pivot on that screw. So once we get this kerf cut, we will take a square, we will lay it in here, and we want to line this fence up so that it's perfectly square with the kerf that we cut in. Once we get that, we will clamp the fence down, put a screw in this end to lock it in place, and then we'll put 2 or 3 more screws, maybe 4 more screws in the middle just to hold it solid. Now what we need to do is we need to raise the blade enough to cut a kerf in here. We're not going to go all the way through the sled. We want to keep enough meat back here to keep the sled together until we get this fence screwed down tightly. Okay, that's our fence almost done. So what I'm going to do is back the fence off enough that I can get a clamp on the end of this fence. Then we're going to line it up with a square to this kerf. Put the other locking screw in, and then before we put the screws in the middle, we're just going to do a test to make sure we're getting perfectly square cuts on this sled. I like to use the longest square I can when I'm doing this kind of thing, just to give me enough of a view of what's going on to be sure that we're square all the way up. Okay, so that's looking pretty square to me. I'll pick up the handheld and show you what I'm seeing here. You can see a little bit of the wood underlying, and we're following that all the way up. And it looks pretty dead square to me. So I'm going to lock this in. Okay, I've got two scrap pieces of wood, both that have a perfectly straight edge on them. I'm going to register that against the fence, do a cut, and see how close to perfectly square we are on both of those. If that looks good, I'll put the other screws in to lock this down and do a final test. Perfect. It doesn't seem to be off at all. I'll know a little better when I cut the tops down. So I will check that then, and if I need any adjustments after that, I will make them then. For now, what I'm going to do is put the final screws in this, and then we are going to raise the blade to full height and complete that kerf. The kerf doesn't have to go right through the end of the crosscut. Once the blade has entered the fence, you're not cutting anymore really anyway. I'll probably tack a little piece of wood on the back here or something just to remind me that, hey, the blade comes through here. I'm going to get this fence bolted down permanently. Gonna run 2 more tests to make sure everything stayed square, and if it is, we're done this crosscut sled. Okay, let's see what we've got. Yeah, that's looking pretty perfect there. So, check this piece. Closes right up and to the straight side. I'm going to finish up now. I'm going to raise the blade to full height, cut the kerf all the way through. Then I'm going to turn this over, wax the bottom of the sled just so it will slide a little bit easier. At some point I probably need to break out the sander and break these edges a bit. They're still pretty sharp and splintery. Probably will do that when I'm sanding the tops of the guitars. Oh yeah, it's not necessary that you wax your crosscut sled on the bottom, but it sure glides a lot nicer. So I'm very happy with that. I can't wait to get back to working on my GGBO entry. I really needed this table saw and those clamping Cauls for the next step. So this isn't really a GGBO build video, but it kind of is. My next video, I will be cutting down the tops to proper length and then gluing them on those blanks. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. If you're interested in my band, One Soul Thrust, the links are below as always. Please check us out. Also, I'll put a link or a card at the end of this video. We've just released our third video from our most recent album, Slaves to the Sky, Masters to the Mess. The song is called The Fight for Love. It's essentially a lyric video with visuals. Like always, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.